Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage, and we're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. And just me today, no Kelly, no Erica, but I do have a guest today, and we are going to talk about habits. And habits being really important. It can have an impact on whether you have a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, or you maybe have an unhealthy diet and unhealthy life. So I brought in a guest today. She is commonly known as the Raw Girl, and she'll explain to us why she's kind of known as the Raw Girl. She is a certified nutrition specialist. She has a master's in nutrition and integrative health. She's a behavior coach. So we're going to dig into that quite a bit. Like, what does that even mean? And there's an LDN, I'm assuming that's a licensed dietary nutritionist. So she's got lots of nice titles and initials and things after the name, but really what we want is not the initials and the titles. What we want is the knowledge that she gained from getting all those great titles. So I'm going to say her name. I'm going to hopefully not butcher it. Esosa Edosomwan. Did I get it? All right. Yeah. Well, hey, welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast. Thanks for coming on. You've got a interesting background. I think you have your own podcast as well. You do a lot of podcasting. You're known as the Raw Girl. So for the listeners or the watchers of the podcast, how about just take some time, give us like your backstory. How did you get here? How did you become a nutrition and health and behavior coach? How did we get here?
Yeah. Well, I think it all started really when I decided to go vegan at the age of 13. I'm Nigerian American, and that's strange to decide to go vegan. But I decided to go plant-based. So I was already kind of concerned about my diet. I just noticed that I was lactose intolerant, and I'm really glad I made those choices really early. And then later on, I would say like in college, I had some encounters. I had a cousin who was a raw foodist, and she had lost a considerable amount of weight. She was obese for most of her life and then became a plus size model, losing all this weight, doing raw food. And she was encouraging me to eat more salads and eat more raw food because I was getting kind of sick in college. That's mostly because I was eating college food, like really I went to Cornell, but it was like our dining hall was crazy. Like the dining hall had everything in it that you could possibly want to eat. So I wasn't exactly eating a ton of fruits and vegetables. It's very possible to be plant-based and be completely unhealthy. So she was getting me to eat more whole foods, et cetera. And I kind of had that in the back of my brain. And then post-college, I had a health crisis. I was actually in a completely different career. I was working as an actress. I was also doing modeling at that time as well, but I had really horrible skin outbreaks. I had chronic fatigue, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I took a class with these amazing couple. They had a restaurant in Harlem called Raw Soul, and they taught how to prepare raw foods. They were like chefs. And they were like, you need to eat more fresh foods and stuff. I think you have some nutritional deficiencies and your skin will probably clear up if you do this or whatever. So I did it for like a month. And I kind of had a really like movie moment when I went into my bathroom and threw out like Proactive and all the like topical things I was trying to do to like fix my skin. I was like, I need to focus on the internal issues that are happening that are causing my skin to look like this. So I threw out all that stuff. I went raw for a month. In a month, my skin looked exactly like it looks now. It was very clear. And I was like, wait, what? That was so interesting. And then I ended up being a raw foodist for about a year or so. I moved from New York City to Northern Virginia, which is where I went to high school and middle school. And I could finally hear my own thoughts. And I heard God say, start a blog. And I was like, what is a blog? I had to Google it. And so I Googled it, and this was before a lot of people had a lot of blogs. This was like 2008-ish, whatever. And I realized, because at that time, after I had healed my skin and done all the stuff, whenever I would go to the grocery store or anywhere, people were always asking me, why are you buying these supplements? What is this vegetable that you're eating? I've had to explain to people like certain vegetables and different things, and it would always turn into these long conversations. And I was like, oh, I should really just start this blog so I could stop having 3-hour conversations in the grocery store. And I can just tell them, hey, check out my blog. You can read about this cool thing that I'm into right now. And then they could go on their merry way. So I started my blog in 2009. I was still working as a producer and actress. And I basically just did it as a hobby. I wrote every day or 3 times a week for 5 years ongoing. I was just really nerding out on different supplements and remedies and different things for a long time. And I was doing it around my entertainment career. And then I started to get, because I started to build a following, I started to get these really intense emails from my readers that would tell me all of their health problems. And so they were like, hey, you know, I have hypertension, I have this, I have this, I have this. What do I do? And I'm like, you should really go see a doctor. Like, I am not a health professional. Like, I cannot give you advice, you know? And I was always really careful and not into the whole idea of, I don't know, there's a lot of people who kind of give advice from their own dietary perspective. And it's not from, you know what I mean? It's just not from a bio individual and specific perspective. And they're obviously not credentialed. And that was always bothered me. So when I got enough of these letters and I felt like, God, I feel horrible turning these people away, I was like, let me research what I can study that will allow me to actually treat different chronic conditions, specifically from a nutritional perspective and specifically from a holistic perspective, looking at diet, supplements, lifestyle, the whole thing. I wasn't interested in doing medication or anything like that. So I knew I wasn't going to go back to school to become a doctor. So I was like, okay, certified nutrition specialist, it's a master's. I was really impressed with the program that I did. I went to Maryland University of Integrative Health. They're amazing. And so I started that program. It took me 5 years to complete that program because I was still shooting television series in Ghana and different places. I had to sometimes drop out of school while I was on set and then come back to school. So it was a little crazy, but I finally finished. It was like 10 years. As you can see, I've got my 10,000 hours and then some in that 10 years of informal and formal study. And then what happened is I got kind of fast tracked into seeing so many clients in a short period of time. So I basically I worked at a wellness clinic where I had 300 patients, all different ages, ethnicities, health conditions each month, 300 patients each month. So my workload was really intense. And I used that to get my hours for my license. But it also taught me a lot about weight loss. It taught me a lot about so many conditions that I had just only had book knowledge of. And then I really got a chance to like really get into how do you deal with this when someone's sitting in front of you, you know? So I did that for maybe like, I don't know, 7-8 months. And while I was there, they were in need of a behavioral coach and they just dubbed me the behavioral coach. It was like my title. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I got to figure this out. So I became really intense about studying habits and behavioral forming and habit forming, all of that stuff. And I realized I was really good at it because I was one of I also work with dietitians, but I was the only certified nutrition specialist there, but I was able to get people to do what I wanted them to do, which is essentially what a behavioral coach is able to do. They're able to coach someone into taking on the behaviors that they need to do. So I realized I was good at it. I kept studying it and it became a part of what I also do. I realized it really worked really well because obviously if I give you recommendations and you don't implement them, or if I don't give you the tools to implement them, then we're both screwed because now you spend money, you have no results. And I'm upset because I want you to get results. So that's how I kind of landed on the behavior coach thing. And then I started my own practice. When I started my own practice, I got additional crazy experience because I had private clients. And then I also, in the first year of my practice, I had a contract with the government here where I serviced really low income, mostly African-American clients in DC and Maryland with also mental disabilities as well as crazy health conditions. So I've seen everything from AIDS to schizophrenia, bipolar mix with hypertension. It was really interesting. I learned a lot about the mind and like how, you know, some of these health imbalances. And then it also was also very depressing to some degree because these people were not cared for. No one really cared about them. Doctors were putting them on 20 medications that they've been on forever. And it was really sad to be like one of the few people who was really advocating for them, but it was also exciting to see that small dietary changes can make a huge difference, especially in mental functioning. You know, if someone has autism or bipolar, whatever, and if you remove certain things and all of a sudden they start improving, it gets exciting. So that's
the short story, right? Of how we got here. Well, I think it's always good to know somebody's backstory. And even though this is not a discussion on raw food, and that may be a topic for another time.
Mm-hmm.
I think the importance of whether you're doing a good job as a raw food vegan, a vegan, you have the carnivore camp, you have the paleo camp, you have the keto camp. And my biggest challenge with the dietary wars and dogmas is that we think that I think every camp thinks that they're right?
Yeah, but they're all wrong.
Right. And so we've circled the wagons and we're shooting in. And really, if all of the groups that talk about which type of whole real food is the best just realize that the war isn't with the person who prefers to eat lots of vegetables and feels better on it, or the war isn't against the person who does really well on a carnivore-ish type diet or a keto or a paleo, and realize that the real issue, and I think you kind of hinted on this early on, was it's the processed food industry and the junk food that we eat. I think the vast majority can be healthy if they just ate more real whole food, stopped arguing about is organic grass-fed meat bad for you? Well, maybe not for me, or at this time of my life. And maybe those vegetables that the carnivore community says they're all toxic. Well, yeah, plants are toxic for a reason. And there's a time to eat them, a time that they're better not eaten. And there is some benefit to some of those little toxins that stress our system, stress the immune system in the gut, and actually help us be healthy. So do you agree with those ideas?
I totally do. I would add that, it's really, for me, it's about really understanding the individual. I feel like people who write diet books and espouse one diet have never seen a client, because one person can come in. That's the first thing I learned, that one person's perfect food is another person's poison. Like someone else could come in and be like, I love drinking that, and I'm great on that, Right. So I'm looking at, and this I did for myself, and now I do on my clients, because I'm big on Ayurveda. I hang out with Chinese medicine doctors all the time. These are my friends. And I love that philosophy, because it's really, when you're looking at Ayurveda and they're looking at your dosha and they're looking at your specific constitution and how you respond to the environment and the foods. So it's never one size fits all. So I need to look at what is that person's health history, their family health history, what kinds of diseases run in their family, any genetic related things that seem like they keep coming up in their family. I need to look at, I usually look at their dosha to help them figure out stuff. I also pay attention to sometimes metabolic typing and how they might be processing food in a certain way or not. I also pay attention to actually culture. And this is something that I didn't even realize was going to serve me well as a nutritionist, but I travel a lot. And right now I'm in between going back to Freetown, Sierra Leone, which I was just there for a month. And I've gone all over the place. I've lived in different places in Africa. I've been to Brazil, been to Jamaica, wherever. So I really understand different people's diets. And I didn't understand how useful that was going to be, but you have to take culture into perspective. And a lot of times that gets missed completely. And so people get these weird diet plans where they're only supposed to eat almonds and milk, yogurt and whatever. Right. And that does not speak to their culture, which is a part of who we are. It's like the things that you smelled when your mother when you were growing up and your mother was making it, it matters. So I have to pay attention to the culture they're from. And then if there's cultural foods that are very unhealthy, then it's like, how do we make a substitution? How do we still enjoy this, but maybe we remove certain things for that person so that they don't live into their family health history? But it has to be individual. It has to be individual for each person. We need to all stop saying one diet fits all and stop arguing about, like you said, which approach. It's more like, okay, for this person, what is working? What is working? What is not working? And I think that my clients feel a sense of relief when they work with us, because they can stop going on Google and trying to figure out if they should do a certain new fad diet. They're like, finally, somebody who's just gonna like assess where I'm at and figure out what's right for me specifically.
Right. So that's maybe another episode, but for today, we're going to talk about habits, behaviors. And so I want to get into that. And I think you already kind of expressed the role of the behavior coach to help somebody kind of make some changes sometimes difficult changes in their habits and behaviors that may be influencing their health and their quality of life. So I talk about this all the time, habits versus behaviors. And I know my term is probably not as technical as yours would be, but can you define for somebody the difference between habits and behaviors? Like, what's a habit and what's a behavior? And if you want, while you think about it, I'll give you mine. Yeah. Okay. So when I talk to people and they say, hey, and part of when I'm talking about health and wellness and with a client, I'm always like, listen, we have to raise your level of fitness in a bunch of different categories. Yeah. Your dietary fitness, your emotional fitness, your respiratory fitness, your sleep fitness, your metabolic fitness. And we've got to, and one of those is also your habitual fitness. Like, what do you do on a daily basis? Because what you do defines who you are. Yeah. And so when somebody says to me, well, I exercise, and I'll ask them, do you have a habit of exercising or do you have a behavior of exercising? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, do you roll out of bed, just get up in the morning and you go exercise? You don't think about it. You just put your shorts on, you go for a run, right? You get done at the end of the day, you go to the gym and you lift and you work out. There's really no thought to it. And it happens day in, day out. That's more of a habit of exercise to me. Yeah. If they have a behavior of exercise, it's like, well, you know what? I got it in like twice this week. You know, I exercise, right? No, that's not a habit of exercise. That's a behavior of exercising periodically, right? Yeah. Versus like, are you a runner? Yes. Okay. How often do you run? Like maybe once a month, twice a month. You're not a runner. You're a person who engages occasionally in an activity of running, but you're not a runner. Does that make sense? So how would you define it?
No, that does make sense. I think the way that you broke it down was good, meaning that the behaviors could be a variety of positive and negative things that you would engage in, whereas the habit is the daily actions that you've repeated enough times that it's now programmed and it's now something that you can do unconsciously. And if you don't do it, you might feel a little weird. Like if I don't do my workout in 3 days in a row, I feel a little strange. I'm like, oh, I'm a little achy. I need to get my workout in. But when it comes to, there's 3 layers of behavioral change, really. It's the outcomes, the processes, and the identity. And usually what happens is people focus on outcomes. So they're trying to get the result. I want to lose 15 pounds. I need to lower my blood pressure. I need to whatever. And then they use that outcome to determine what process is. And the process involves the routines, the habits, the things that you have to do to change that outcome, right? So they're working from outcomes into processes. I focus on identity. The reason why I focus on identity is because I'm getting that person interested in who do I have to become in order to achieve this outcome? And if they can get really like, oh, I have to become this other person who exercises every day, then it starts to tell you what the processes are, and you can track those processes. And then those processes will lead to an inevitable outcome without you being so freaked out about the 15 pounds. You're going to lose it if you're the type of person who works out every day, right? So I always get my clients to focus. We usually take them through a process where we focus on the identity first, and then it leads to that outcome.
I think in my training, we've called that the be, do, have model, right? Mm-hmm. Where most people want the have, do, be model, right? If I have this, then I'll do the things I need to do and I'll be that person versus I got to be this person so that I do these things and then I'll get, right? We want first. If you buy me that really nice training outfit, I guarantee you I am going to work out. Probably not, right? But you'll have a nice outfit, but that's not necessarily it. But I think are you referring to that same model, right? The be, do, have, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so there's good habits, and I explain this to patients all the time. You may have a different take, and you let me know. But I try and tell my patients, listen, I don't need you to be perfect in life or pristine. Mm-hmm. What I need you to have is more good, constructive habits and a few bad behaviors, so that you have some fun and you're doing the other things, and that needs to be the opposite of what you're doing right now, which is you have more destructive habits, few constructive habits. You have a lot of maybe destructive habits and behaviors, and we got to kind of change and flip-flop that a little bit. So how do you look at that with your patients when you're looking at them? Do you kind of try and help them see the same thing? Like, I know because people think about habits sometimes only as the good ones.
Yeah.
But when you look at their health history, like I'll ask for 3 days of their life, like give me 3 days of your life. And when you look at 3 days of somebody's life, if they're honest about it, you can say, okay, here's like 5 things you're doing on a daily basis that are habits, but they're more destructive than constructive. We need to change those things. You can have those things as a behavior occasionally, but it can't be the thing you do in, day out. Do you discuss those things as a behavior coach with your clients?
I don't. So I basically am, as a behavioral coach, I'm kind of like a Jedi, like strategist, where I'm figuring out how to get that person to get to where they're going. And they may or may not know exactly what I'm doing sometimes, but really the thing that I do discuss though, is sometimes I talk about minimum viable habits. And that's after I've taken someone through the education of like, this is how your brain works. You have to repeat things in order for them to become habits. This is how you form good habits. This is how you form bad habits. When I get to a minimum viable habit, the minimum viable habit, this is something I just made this term up, is basically like the habit that you need, the smallest, I guess, or the most important habit that you need that will basically cause a tipping point that make you do other good habits. So for some people, that's exercise. For some people, that's sleep. Like if they don't get sleep, they'll make bad food choices. They won't have the energy to exercise, and then it all spills over. So if I can get them to get the minimum viable habit together, then they usually are going to start to fall in line with those other things. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. But it's, if it's diet, some people, I find that exercise and sleep, usually one or the other it works a lot. Like some people, a lot of people, when they exercise, it's like, if you just exercise, are you really going to go to a fast food joint? And you kind of feel good about yourself. And then you're more likely to go want a salad or want some Whole Foods or something that I told you to possibly eat. Right. Whereas if you don't exercise, you might just be like, you know what, whatever, I'm just going to eat whatever is available. So sometimes it's identifying the thing that will allow them to do other habits that tip. And then I don't really focus as much on all the time on the bad ones, unless I'm trying to create a substitution. So if someone has something that's crazy destructive, I want to find out what needs is this bad habit meeting for this person, and substitute that with something that meets the same needs or provides the same reward, which will enable them to actually replace that bad habit. Or else, if I replace it with something that's just generally like kind of healthy, but it doesn't meet the needs that they need met, they're going to continue doing the bad habit, and they're going to continue reporting to me that they're doing the bad habit. You see?
Yeah. So I think it's important to focus on, for some people, definitely it's better to focus on the positives, right? For other people, because some people, they get motivated by fear or pain, and some people get motivated by the positives, right? So we got to meet people different places, helping them be aware of goals. I like the idea of the minimum viable habit, because you do see that with some people, is that as if they start exercising, then they go, okay, I'm exercising. I start to like what I see as a result of that, and I feel better. So maybe I'll put some healthier foods in too. And now that I'm exercising more, man, I'm more tired at night and I'm getting a better night's sleep. So maybe that has something to do with it. And so, yeah, you do see that. However, I'm sure you have that person who says, I just can't get motivated to do it, right? Yeah. So for the person who you're trying to make the change, maybe you've done that be, do, have model with that, like, and they get it. They're right there with you. And then they go home and then they do it for a couple of days, and then they are back to their old habit, right? And maybe you do, Jedi mind tricks, and that doesn't happen in your base. But I think it's fairly common that people default back to things, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But what do you say to the person who says, I understand what you're saying, I want to do what you're saying,
Yeah.
I just can't stay motivated to do it. What do you say to those people?
Yeah. So there's several problems that can happen when someone is not quote unquote motivated. Motivated just means you haven't clarified exactly why this is exciting to you, or you have subconscious programming that's withholding you from actually going for this goal. Maybe you're actually afraid. I have people who are afraid to lose weight because they've been overweight their entire lives. So the thought of other people reacting to them and getting that attention is actually really scary. So they'll sabotage themselves to the cows come home because it feels better to be overweight, honestly. Right. So there's a couple of reasons why it can be, there could be lack of motivation. The other thing that involves with motivation is accountability. So sometimes some people really do well. There are certain types that do really well more with community-based accountability, groups, challenges. I have clients like that who just they don't, when they're in my class, they're great. And then as soon as they leave and there's not a group of people that they have to like check in with, they suck. So it's like, well, you need to build accountability into your life. And it can't just be your friend who's going to let you do whatever, whenever you feel like it. It needs to be a trainer, a professional. Maybe you get a group of friends together and you're like, this is when we're working out. And you have that one annoying, like David Goggins like friend who's like, get up, let's go, whatever. You have to have that one person who's really intense, who's not going to let you off the hook. Right. So I usually see that thing of like, I don't feel motivated as a red flag that I can help them also identify, what are the benefits I'm getting out of this in the first place? Maybe I'm not clear on that. Maybe that's part of their problem. They're not clear on what am I getting out of this? Okay, if I lose this weight, I'm going to be able to have more energy to play with my kids. I might make more money because I have more energy because I don't really get as much work done. Different things where they really are just imagining for themselves, what are the benefits, what are the positive feelings associated with this thing? Sometimes that needs to be clarified. Sometimes, and sometimes, when I worked at the weight loss clinic, sometimes these motivational things were really vain. Like people were like, I'm going to a wedding and I don't want to look horrible. And that can work temporarily, but when they actually get to the wedding afterwards, they either need to create something new or tap into something else, or else they may fall off after the wedding. They're like, oh yeah, I made it to the wedding. I look amazing. And then they're like, okay, I don't really have to do this anymore. So accountability, understanding their why, and then the subconscious programming is where I do the Jedi mind tricks, right? So in my practice, we have a therapist who does what we call dynamic change therapy, but she's also a clinical hypnotherapist. And she actually it's kind of like being a functional medicine doctor for the mind. It's like getting to the root cause of why, if there's trauma or there's other things that are holding someone back from, or causing them to have these negative behaviors over time, where they keep kind of yo-yoing back between trying to do well and then they're not doing well. And that really helps me, because if I send them to her, by the time they come back to me, they're ready to do what I'm telling them to do. They're not over here like fighting with themselves internally. I found that when people, especially with like weight loss, but there's other health conditions that we've seen that also people have these issues with for sure. It's just people sometimes will get to it, like you said, where they're doing well for a certain point. And then when it gets like to a breaking point where they start to feel a little uncomfortable, and now it's starting to like push it, they'll sabotage themselves at that point, right? And in order to help them not sabotage themselves, we need to get to the subconscious root of why that's happening in the first place.
Yeah, I think a lot of health issues and habits are rooted in, things that we conscious or more often unconscious things that happen to us, things our parents, our fathers, our teachers, our preachers, right, embedded in us when we were young, or scarred into us as we were young, and that's our primitive programming. And then we go off into the world, and when we're stressed out, we oftentimes default to our most primitive programming. And so we default back to those times of insecurity, those patterns of belief that our fathers or mothers or teachers or preachers gave us that may have been good or bad, and we default back to those things. I think on the topic of motivation too, it's tough because if you always have to be motivated to do something, there are days that I am not motivated to go exercise or go read research papers or whatever it is, right? And so sometimes if I'm not motivated to do it, maybe it makes sense to not do it. But when it comes to some of these aspects about health and well-being, I just find that once, I think there's a different term, and you give me your take on it, but I think to some degree, there's a level of discipline that comes to building a habit, because you need that consistency over time. And one of the things I try and get patients to understand is, look, you may not like it. You may not love it. You may not have the motivation to do it, but just set on that you make that promise to yourself that you're just going to do it today and do it. And tomorrow you can do it. And even if we're talking about exercise, I'm going to do 1 minute. I hate it. Okay, but do 1 minute. Right? Yeah. Just make that promise and be disciplined to be consistent, and more likely over time, that consistency is going to be the thing that kind of creates the habit versus the fact that you love it or, oh man, it's my favorite thing to do. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's so good. So I always say, like in my Staying Ageless 30+ class, which is very much behavioral oriented, we always use the mantra, don't break the chain, never miss twice. Meaning, like, if I mess up today, cool, I just need to get back on it tomorrow because I'm trying to create enough repetition, right? But then also I teach my clients that bad habits, unfortunately, are immediately gratifying, but then have long-term negative consequences. Whereas good habits are actually not very pleasurable. And then they usually have long-term positive consequences, right? So what we have to do is play with the way the mind works. And we try to make these kind of unpleasurable things somehow give our brain a little, thing of like, yeah, let's do this. And sometimes tracking is a way to do that, because when we check things off, we feel good about the fact we checked it off, or we give ourselves some sort of reward in some ways. And I never let them use food as a reward, or else that causes other problems. So it's understanding that, yes, doing things that are good for you are generally not always going to feel great in the immediate. You have to be aware of that. And then you have to prepare for that and create other ways to like give yourself a pat on the back so that you feel like I'm going somewhere, because when you eat that donut, it's amazing. But if you eat like 50 donuts, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like you start to see a little pooch, you're like, oh no.
Well, I think too, people like an easy life, right?
Yes.
And pretty much if you're living an easy life, right, on a day-to-day basis,
yeah,
it's probably not going to be a very comfortable life in the long run, right? But if you do a lot of hard things, life just gets easier. I think you see that too when you look at people that come to this country that have really hard lives. And you can probably speak to this better than I can, people who haven't had food, they haven't had good housing, quality of life, and they come to this country and somehow it's like, they're super successful. Somehow, they make it, everything's great, everything's awesome. They've had this really hard life. And now somehow all that hard work and they have an appreciation for what hard really is. And now life, and they put that work in, they've been diligent, and now they have an easier real life going forward versus the person who grows up with everything. Life is easy. And then they get later on, they're like, okay, I'm chronically ill, I'm chronically sick. They didn't really ever put the hard work in to be anything, right? And so they don't have a great life. Their life seems difficult. Their health is difficult because they haven't put the work in.
Yes.
How do you see that similar?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I do think, as a first generation perspective, and I was literally just talking to someone about this, I feel like yesterday or the day before, because they were just like, there's a lot of really successful Nigerians. And I was like, yeah, when you come from a country where there's like water problems, government problems, kidnapping, internet's not working, just literally just doing the most basic thing, unless even when you're in the elite, because, the thing is that there's really, really wealthy people in every African country. And then there's this haves and have-nots. So it's like, even if you're in the really elite, it's very difficult to do everything because you're concerned about your security, you're concerned about this, you're concerned about this. So you put a Nigerian in like a place where there's running water, electricity, the ability to call people, they just start businesses and do well and do whatever they got to do because they're like, oh my God, I used to be like my back was against the wall basically all the time. And now I have this like space to like, just go. Of course I'm going to go. Of course I'm going to do it. And I'm going to be like really driven to like really, be successful. So it's a thing. It is a thing. When it comes to health, I mean, it's a little bit more nuanced. Sometimes I think that also what happens with health is, and this is something I've really had a lot of deep thought about, like, how do I teach someone how to become more intuitive and in tune with what is actually happening in their body? Because I think what most of us do is we are, trained to eat the way we're trained to eat by our parents and by our environment or whatever. We get TV commercials, exactly, media. We kind of just like, we get jobs, we get really focused on our work, we do our stuff, we eat kind of unconsciously. We're not paying attention to, after I ate this meal, did I get tired? Did I feel ache and pain? Like, a lot of people just wake up one day and they go to their doctor and they're surprised at their diagnosis. But that means that along the way, their body was probably trying to give them signs that something was wrong, but they weren't listening. So for me, it's like, there has to be like, somehow it's like, how do I teach people to become deeper listeners of their own body and like, be like, oh, that's off. Like I ate that and that was weird. Or, I didn't feel right when I did that. I don't know.
But don't you think that part of that is because we're so inundated by the voice of everything else that we're not really listening to our inner voice? I mean, we've got a TV on, we've got Instagram on, we got YouTube on, we got all these things on, and we're not actually taking time to sit back and say, what's my inner voice kind of telling me? And so when you don't listen to it, right, you become out of touch with it. And if you were never really in touch with it, how would you know what it's trying to tell you? And we also have an environment around us that's telling us that those are normal things to experience, right? That acid reflux is totally normal. And all these things that we can just manage them with a med, those things are normal. So now you have a person who grew up in an environment where they learned how to eat off TV, and somebody then says, hey, those symptoms that you're experiencing, those aren't really problems they're caused by within. Those are problems caused by out. Everybody has reflux. Don't worry about it. You just take this, it'll be okay. And we become out of touch with people. And I think it's when you go back, like go sit in the woods for a while and only have your mind, right, to focus on and inner thoughts. That can really, I think there's a show on TV or something like Alone or something like that, where they put these people out into the wilderness and they can't tolerate themselves and what's going on in their head, right? Because their mind plays tricks on them, but they're also listening. They have to really perceive what's going on. And some people can manage it, but some can't. But I think that's a big part of the issue is we've become like almost unattached from our inner intelligence, our inner self.
That's so good. Yeah. And that ties into mindfulness, which is exactly what you're saying, like being in nature. I mean, all of Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, like part of being healthy is being in harmony with your environment and being in alignment with your purpose. Like we don't talk about that in health in a Western side, really. Mm-hmm. It's like you can go to a job that you hate and it can kill you. It can cause stress that causes then a health problem, so we have to look at like our entire lives. But I do think the mindfulness, the meditation, all those things can definitely help. And then
So I don't have time for that. I have Instagram to look at, Facebook posts. I got this series on TV. I don't even know what it is. And I'm trying to finish Netflix. I'm trying to get it all done. How am I supposed to fit mindfulness in there?
I have this one Chinese medicine doctor who said that your resilience and your immunity is also to do with what you let in. That's including the media. And I was like, that's really good. Because you kind of have to have a filter. Like there needs to be a boundary. So you need to kind of set boundaries for yourself where you have, just like you said, it's like, don't have all inputs. Make sure that you have time in your week, in your day, to actually just be with yourself and like sit, or else you're just constantly inputting stuff. And then you can't even figure out what is my voice and what is not my voice.
Right. I mean, if all the input is somebody else's, I mean, it's one of the reasons I don't like to watch traditional TV or news, because it's all biased. I mean, and I almost think part of the problem is that we're seeing in this country specifically isn't necessarily the you and me or whoever have a problem with each other. It's this external force that makes a lot of money off driving chaos, right? And so, hey, if we just keep stirring stuff up, we got lots of things to talk about. I can keep my political place. I can do all this stuff. When in reality, I think the vast majority of us, if we didn't have that external communication telling us how we're supposed to think or how we're supposed to feel, or tell us how we are thinking when we aren't thinking a certain way, most of us would just get along. We would just enjoy each other's company, learn from each other. But we're so bombarded by external noise, we don't listen to our own internal voice and almost don't have our own real opinion to some degree.
No, it's so true. It's so true. I'm exceptionally strong-willed. So I've always been like, okay with doing things when everyone else thought it was weird. I'm vegan and Nigerian family, whatever it is, you know what I mean? I have no problem. I don't drink alcohol. So sometimes people give me the side eye about that, and I'm okay with that because I know that it's coming from within me and what I want to do. And I think that, like you said, a lot of us aren't giving ourselves the space to really be like, what do I want? So that I'm not just going with the crowd all the time, unconsciously. And then I get unconscious health results because of this, because I'm just following everyone else.
So if we get back to kind of some of this habit stuff, and I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to drive a couple of questions off it. Do you dig in with clients and try to uncover the why they've developed the habits they have? And I think you talked about it a little bit, but sometimes we tell people just change, right? And we don't, I think sometimes it sounds easy, but there's often things that maybe are protective about our habits, especially our negative habits. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I definitely get into the why. The way that I get into the why usually first is I want to understand, and I will do this collaboratively with someone because they're going to help me figure it out. I want to understand which of the 6 human needs this bad habit is meeting. So there's uncertainty, certainty, significance, love and connection, growth and contribution. Growth and contribution are positive. So usually a bad habit is not meeting growth and contribution. Okay. But for instance, I'll give you an example. I had a client who's actually a doctor. She's a DO who had issues with overeating, binge eating and stuff like this. Right. So we needed to get to, what is this meeting for you? Like what are what is the needs it's meeting for you? We figured out it was meeting sort of like love and connection. When we got down to it, she felt like she needed comfort, like almost like a sense of home, like it was causing that for her, but then it was causing all these negative consequences. So then we unpacked, what can you do that would cause this sense of comfort that won't involve eating, right? So we started unpacking that. She started she started doing meditation because she wanted to feel more centered and balanced. And she started doing stuff in her space. And then I made the rule that if she was going to overeat, she was welcome to do so, but she had to do it in public because she was doing it in private. So I was like, no problem. So I just want you to overeat while you're at work in front of your colleagues or in front of your son. You're not allowed to do it, you know what I mean, alone anymore. Because a lot of times shame and privacy are ways that we keep things going because no one else knows we're struggling with this. So then we can do it in the dark and then it keeps going. So the combination of finding things to replace it that gave her that need and then forcing her, giving her this uncomfortable exercise of sure, you're allowed to engage in this horrible habit, but now you have to do this in a way that makes it very public because it was a private horrible habit. It was gone. And she already started losing weight. Her skin was getting better. All these people were commenting. And then she gets addicted to the positive feedback. She bought a bike. Then she gets addicted to you see what I'm saying? So it keeps going. But we did have to do that initial thing. I can't just tell you to stop overeating. That doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes I think you're right. You can't just take something away. Something will always fill the void, right? So you have to come up. I think it's easier to exchange a habit, right? And maybe sometimes it is small increments that you make small agreements that the person can agree to, and make those in small amounts at a time. Just like we were talking about before, I don't have an hour if let's say it's exercise, I don't have an hour to exercise. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a minute?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, of course I have a minute. Okay, good. Give me a minute. And tomorrow, do you think you'll have one more minute? Like 2 minutes? Yeah. Okay, good. The next day, I want you to add 1 minute every day. And before you know it, that person is now 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And even if they came back and said, listen, I haven't increased to 6 minutes, but I'm doing 5 minutes of exercise every day. Great. We just built a daily habit that's positive, that's constructive, that's exercise based. Same thing with eating. I'm sure you hear this all the time. I don't have time to eat healthy, but I do have time to drive and go to the same store and get the unhealthy food and bring it home and sit in front of the TV and eat it, right? So how you see that, I'm sure, and those are sometimes you have to help them make those exchanges, right?
Well, this is what I do that kind of throws people off. I'm like that person who will find every way for you to possibly do whatever you said that you don't have time to do. So I'm like, okay, you don't have time to, because my clients have money. So I'm like, do you want to get a meal delivery service? They're like, oh, I never even thought about that. Well, I'm like, well, I think that might be a good option for you. And they're like, oh, okay. Because then it's in their kitchen and it's there and they have no excuse. Because you have to make, initially when you're making the substitution, a good habit needs to be easy. It needs to be visible. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be satisfying. So if I make sure that they are going to have a fridge stock full of stuff that's healthy and they have no excuse, they're likely going to eat it. It's there. So they don't have the time now to go to the drive-thru because it's like, oh, I already have this here, you know? So sometimes you have to just work with the challenge that someone says. Sometimes people tell me, I don't have time to go to the gym, or, I don't feel like paying for a gym membership, or I don't know, whatever. And then I show them this video of this 86-year-old woman who lost hundreds of pounds. She went from a size 12 to a size 4, walking around her living room. And she's 86. She got a Fitbit. She had no money for a gym membership. She's like, I don't care. I'm just going to walk in circles around my living room. And they watch that video and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, she's 86. How old are you again?
Yeah. And it's many times it starts with a small thing, right? Like a tidal wave starts as a small ripple in the water, right? So you have to start somewhere. And, I think we've seen that the excuse habit come up quite a bit through COVID. I'm overweight because, we got locked down and I couldn't exercise. No. Nobody said you couldn't exercise. You just had to come up with constructive ways to do it, right? And that's where the person who has that habit probably didn't really stop, right? The person who just had a behavior, it was an easy out. Hey, I'm not going to do, I'm just going to sit home and eat. And you could still eat good choices, right?
Totally. But see, the person who usually creates the easy out, they also make it really hard. They have to be perfect with everything. I need to get a trainer, and then I need to get a gym membership. And then, oh my God, my Peloton needs to come. And I'm like, what do you have in your house? Do you have stairs? Tell me what you have, because I'm going to break all of your excuses down. I'm like, you could go up the stairs, literally up and down the stairs. That's great exercise. What do you have available? So I think it's just also sometimes flipping that switch where they're trying to go down this negative, oh, I don't have this and I don't have this. And you're like, well, no, actually, let's talk about what you do have, or how to increase movement overall, because it doesn't have to be exercise in quotations. Can you park further away every single time you go to the grocery store? Can you do this? Can you do that? You see what I'm saying? So it's just kind of just opening. It's like someone's in a tunnel and then you're like, no, there's this whole room here that you didn't even realize.
Yeah. And I tell people, hey, 30-minute fitness. You don't have an hour? Every 30 minutes, set your clock. You have one of these. I guarantee you have one of these right next to you all the time that you're looking at Instagram. Every time that 30-minute timer goes off, get up and do 5 squats. Get up and walk to the kitchen and get a glass of water and drink the glass of water, right? Well, what if I miss it? I don't care. If you miss half of the 30 minutes in the day, right, you still might have accomplished 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever it is that you wanted to do. You might have had 5 or 6 glasses of water where you typically only had 1. Just find ways to do it. And this isn't really all about exercise. It's just, we're talking about, because those are, I think, sometimes easy things for people to understand. But I'm sure you also see a point where some of those people who get fixated on bad habits, they get a new habit that's a constructive habit. And then all of a sudden that constructive habit becomes destructive. You see that? So think about the person who is, I'm going to exercise. And now I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to exercise every day. And now that exercise becomes excessive, too much, no recovery. And now they're obsessed about it. Or I'm going to eat so healthy. And I like the way I look, but now they start to get focused too much. And it becomes that, you know what I'm saying? It becomes potentially problematic. Do you see that happen sometimes with people? And how do you get them to reshift?
I mean, I'm always kind of trying to build imbalance from the beginning. And I'm also always, because I've dealt with eating disorders, I'm always very aware, because addictive behaviors can be very dangerous, and you have to deal with them a certain way. Like, you would never take someone with an eating disorder and give them a calorie count. You know what I mean? And that's very horrible, because then they'll get fixated on the calorie count.
Exactly.
And they'll just keep. So I'm observing very early on, does this person seem like they have an addictive behavior or not? Because I'm going to be treating them a certain way to be careful to not trigger that sort of addictive, behaviors. I do have some clients who really want to weigh themselves every day. And I'm like, please don't do that, please. Because that will just make you crazy. You'll be looking at it. And that's focused on outcomes. And I'm like, no, I want you to focus on the processes. How about you track your workouts instead? Fixate on that or whatever. And then we can weigh yourself every 2 weeks or something. If someone were to get to the place where I haven't actually had anyone where they've I've worked with athletes before, actually, who were just doing it because they're athletes and they're biking excessively or whatever. I've never had anyone with crazy behaviors with exercise, overdoing it or anything, but I have had people who are athletes or people who leveled up a bit, and I had to help them get over certain plateaus by actually increasing the amount that they ate, because now their body's burning so much that they need more food, and they don't realize it. They think they should still be eating really little, and that's not good. I used to kind of boggle the minds of these doctors that I worked with at the wellness clinic, because sometimes I would just increase people's calories and they would actually lose more weight. And that's because they were exercising too much, under eating. And I was like, no, you need more fuel for your body to know to even release the weight. So we would increase the calories, they would lose weight, and they'd become my best friend, because now they're eating a lot and they feel great and they're exercising. Right. So I'm like, it's fine if you're exercising, but we need to pay attention if you're fueling enough, because you can't be doing that at a deficit. So yeah.
So what would you say, because I know we're running short on time, I want to keep you on track. What would you say are the 3 most important constructive habits that you would give to almost anybody right off the bat? What would be 3 habits to really focus on and work on?
Well, I would start with sleep. Sleep for me is the foundation of healthy living. It affects how my brain is going to crave foods. Like, if I don't sleep, my brain wants more glucose. I might eat a lot of pizza, carbs, all this heavy stuff, or stuff that I probably should be eating, sugar, right? And then sleep. If I don't get sleep, I don't have the energy to exercise anyway. So, and I'm not integrating the information that I'm learning. My performance will lag. So sleep is kind of and I think everyone from CEOs to athletes have finally realized that if you want to perform, basically, if you want to be a well-performing human being in any aspect, whether it be as an athlete, as a CEO, as a business person, as a health professional, you need to sleep. There's plenty of doctors who do not sleep. And I have doctor friends that I'm like, child, you need to go to sleep. I see that you are sleep deprived. How are you going to make decisions on behalf of your patients if you don't sleep? So sleep is the first one. I think maybe the second one would be, I think it probably would be hydration. Maybe getting enough water in. Why do I say that? It's because I'm surprised at the number of people who are on hypertensive medications and have high blood pressure and stuff, and they're just dehydrated. I'm surprised at the number of people who are constipated, who are just dehydrated. I'm surprised at the number of people who are tired and they're just dehydrated. And literally sometimes I don't think that we've been giving enough education at how much water is important and how much we need water for all of the processes to run, all of that stuff. So staying hydrated is also going to keep me on the good foot. It's really hard to do 3. And then I think if I was only going to choose 3, then the last one I would choose is creating the ability to manage your stress well. Why? Because stress kills. Stress will lead you, even if you have the best diet, you sleep well, you whatever. I mean, you're probably not going to sleep well if you're stressed though. Like that starts to erode your sleep too. You know what I mean?
You're talking about emotional stress, right?
Emotional stress. So when I talk about stressors, I talk about there's a couple of different stressors, right? There's the external stressors, there's the internal stressors. I have a lot of clients who deal with internal stressors. Like there's a lot with race in America. Black women have a lot on us. People are trying to be perfectionists. They want to be good at what they do. And then they have this internal like perfectionism thing going on. But some of my clients, that actually creates a problem for them because then they're anxious all the time about like, they have to be the best, they have to show up, they have to do this, and they have the pressure of this, and they have the pressure of their family. So I help them manage their internal stressors with things like prayer, meditation, getting in those daily things that calm them down. And then there's the external stressors, like, are your relationships productive? Is your work toxic? Your work environment toxic? Or even environmental toxins. Do you live in a place that doesn't have smog and all of these crazy things, right? So I want to somehow create a lifestyle that manages these stressors. And that's what I noticed from, I became obsessed with longevity. So I started interviewing all these people over 100 or, 70 plus, because I was interested in, why are you not on medications? Why do you have so much energy? Why do you have such a great lease on life? And they all basically said the same thing, but you'll notice that they all had positive mental outlooks. They all managed their stress really well. So, and then of course they had the dietary things and the daily habit things, but I feel like stress is that tipping point where even if you think you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's and you have a perfect diet and you exercise, if you don't handle your stress, you can still end up sick.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the load, right? And so you're never going to escape stress. So it's always a matter of taking on some stress. Stress has what we call a hormetic effect, right? No stress is not good, doesn't help you. Too much stress, not good. And it doesn't matter what category, emotional, environmental, chemical, physical, all those stressors, we need to have them and then kind of clear the palate a little bit. And every time you get stressed, it's like training. I always go back to athletics. It's like running. If I asked you to run a marathon and you aren't a runner, that stress would kill you, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it killed the first person that did it, right? So, but if you train and recover and train and recover and train and recover, you can manage so much more stress and it doesn't have a negative impact because you've created this level of fitness to be able to manage it. The person who says, I manage stress, who says I can tolerate a lot of stress. Those are usually the people who are at threshold, right? Mm-hmm. They're always at threshold. Yeah. And they're thinking they're managing it really well, when in reality, they're always on edge. The person who's managing it well is the person who you yell at and they're like, whatever, hey, we got to get this done like right now. Okay, right? And they get it and somehow they just kind of move on and get it done. Do they get upset? I'm sure they do. But then tomorrow it's over. I got it. We're handled it. Finished. Yeah. So I have about 10 more questions, but I know you've got to get to work. I got stuff to do too. So maybe we'll do a follow-up somewhere down the line. Okay. For the listeners, they may want to say, okay, so how do I hear more about what you have to say? So where can they find you? Do you have a website? I think your gang will send me that information, but tell people where they can find you, podcasts, social contacts, where can they get a hold of you?
Cool. So my website is therawgirl.com. If you go there, you'll find information about how to see anyone in our practice. We have certified nutrition specialist therapists and a naturopathic doctor. And if you click classes, it'll take you to stayingagelessuniversity.com. That's where my healing programs are. We have a hormonal balancing academy. We have a longevity program and other cool things. You can find me on socials at the Raw Girl. And I have a podcast called Staying Ageless, and it's a weekly podcast, and we interview really cool people and talk about different ways to achieve longevity. So you can check that out as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. We'll try and maybe hook up for the follow-up to get some of the rest of this done.
Okay.
Have a fantastic day, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.